Thank you so much for Dr. Peters for the warm introduction, introducing me and Dr. Russell, and those who are related to this um, opportunity. I really want to give special thanks to. In order to clearly deliver my thought, I used to just prepare script and reading it so that both of us can understand each other. And I know it might be a little boring. That is why I also prepare some fancy slides, but I don't know it is really fancy or not. So yes, this picture actually describes the primitive Earth environment out of which the life might be emerging out of. So before I directly jump into the divine action theories and their application to the origin of life, I would like to introduce some theories concerning the origin of life from antiquity up to nowadays, such as spontaneous generation, early panspermia, and the modern and contemporary abiogenesis. So spontaneous generation refers to a theory about the origin of life in antiquity. According to the theory, living beings are spontaneously formed out of the basic constituents and their interactions. So for instance, Empedocles, an ancient Greek philosopher, the living beings are the outcome of the arrangement of the four basic elements, and this arrangement of the elements was made by the tension of the two forces. Those are love and strife. So for him, there was a possibility of the emergence of ox-headed offspring of man in a certain cosmic cycle, literally. So in which the dominant force is the strife. So since the elements are arranged spontaneously whenever a new living being is born to the world, there was such possibility. And among early church fathers, for instance, Basil, the Archbishop of Caesarea, interprets Genesis 1:24 and argues that spontaneous generation can be explicated by the work of the earth that God endowed at the beginning. Basil quotes Aristotle's writings about spontaneous generation in his footnotes and claims that some species, such as eels, winged insects, and etc., appear spontaneously out of the muds and the rains. So in the 18th century, spontaneous generation reappears on the stage by the scholars such as George Louis Buffon, Pierre-Louis de Maupertuis. If you are familiar with the history of science, those are really big names in history. However, due to Louis Pasteur's renowned experimentation, people came to know that the appearances of microorganisms found in the course or the fermentation, which had been assigned to spontaneous generation, derive actually from the contact between the microorganisms in the air and the organic solution. So basically, Pasteur's experimentation and argument became the major empirical data and source for the early panspermia theory that I shall explore in following. So the Greek term panspermia means ubiquitous life or seeds everywhere. Panspermia theory was suggested by certain groups of really renowned physicists and biologists such as William Thomson and Helmholtz and Arrhenius. So simply putting it, because of their contemporary cosmology, they commonly held that the universe was eternal and thus the life seeds have existed always. In that sense, life on Earth started because it was just seeded from another planet, just as Dr. Peters pointed out at the beginning. And they commonly held, in that sense, life on Earth started because it was just seeded from another planet or another star system through certain transfer mediums like meteorites and comets. However, as new cosmology based on the Big Bang Theory develops, the argument of the early panspermia is no longer accepted. But there is a group of scientists who still holding the comets and meteorites as the transfer medium, even though those life seeds are not eternally existing. So entering into the early 20th century, Alexander Oparin and J.B.S. Haldane respectively claimed that the first cell might have emerged from the organic soup filled with various organic compounds due to the reducing atmosphere and the energy like ultraviolet and lightning, which catalyzed the synthesis of organic molecules. You might have heard about quasarvate theory, suggested by Oparin, and this is pretty much important. So in 1953, an experimentation was conducted to verify the Oparin and Haldane hypothesis in the University of Chicago. Stanley Miller and Harold Urey built experimental equipment that recreated the primitive atmosphere, which contained steam, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, which is recreating the reducing atmosphere. Into the gas mixture, Miller and Urey applied electric discharges imitating the primitive energy source, lightning, and they left it to cool down. So after repeating several processes, Miller and Urey confirmed that the water in the equipment had become a red-brown solution. Miller announced that 10% of the carbons were transformed into organic compounds and 2% into amino acids. So the critical implication of this experimentation is that amino acids, that is the building blocks of proteins, are easily formed when the proper environmental conditions are met. With regard to the contemporary origin of life hypothesis, we can simply divide them into two groups. One is the replication first view and the metabolism first view. So life phenomena are the outcome of the complex interdependence processes of metabolism and replication. So researchers in this field, the origin of life, they are highly skeptical about the spontaneous generation of the two processes. So that is why they are divided into two groups of the metabolism first view and the replication first proponents. So based on various empirical data, the replication first view proponents claim that RNA or primitive RNA-like molecules might have worked as a catalyst and as genetic material discovered so they were actually having in their mind of ribozymes, which was discovered in the early 1980s, and ribozyme is working as the genetic material and at the same time as the protein-like catalyst. So they are working on those kind of presumptions. Due to the discovery of the ribozyme, the metabolism first view is not much shared by many researchers. Among them, however, Gunther Wasserschasser, if I correctly, I don't know if I correctly pronounce his name, but his hypothesis, that is the hydrothermal vent theory, which is in the deep sea around the hydrothermal vent, that might be the place that the first living cell might have emerged out of. So this scholar postulates a particular mineral, that is pyrite. The surface of pyrite, according to him, has a positive charge, and thus it easily synthesizes with negatively charged molecules that might have carbon dioxide. If that is the case, it is plausible that when undergoing synthesis with carbon dioxide containing molecules, carbon-based organic compounds can accumulate, and finally the first living system emerges on the surface of pyrite. The organic compounds formed on the surface are polar lipids that release water molecules out of the surface as they adhere more strongly to it. Due to this process, he claims the cell membrane, inner hydrophobic and outer hydrophilic, could have formed. Moreover, cell division occurs by the invasion of the existing pyrite crystal into the nucleus of the newly attached pyrite crystal. In doing so, the cell grows and divides. Later, during the repeating processes of cell division and growth, heterotrophic life, which feeds on external organic molecules, could have emerged from the detached membrane. So the origin of life theories thus far describe both metabolism first and replication first alike. Both of them presuppose a gradual emergence of life. So basically they are rejecting any spontaneous generation of life either by divine intervention or like ultimate design. So because two theistic options weaken the integrity of natural processes, then we have to ask, we don't have any other option or not. And lo and behold, and voila. My answer is yes, there is. Theistic evolutionists claim that God acts in and through natural process to bring about God's purpose, while God does not violate the laws of nature that are the work of God himself. So in next few minutes, we're going to see two giant scholars, Russell and Polkinghorne's theories about divine action, and try to think those theories in light of the origin of life issue. So I think some of you already familiar with John Polkinghorne. With regard to the question how God creates new living beings in the world, Polkinghorne suggests the two kinds of divine action as information input. First one is the fine-tuning with the initial information input, which caused the universe to evolve into the current one, that carbon-based life, including self-conscious humanity, can emerge out of. If the force ratio, he says, had been slightly different from what it actually is, then the current universe would not exist. But Polkinghorne knows that this speculation of information input at the beginning alone cannot explain the entire cosmic process. That is why, along with the initial information input, Polkinghorne suggests an ongoing pure and active divine information input. In light of the chaos theory, he claims that an envelope of possibility, which is produced by matter, is brought up to the macroscopic realm, and one out of many possibilities is determined by an information input that signifies the work of the mind. So basically, Polkinghorne employs the analogy of the downward causality of the mind on the physical matters to describe the divine information input into the world. So highlighting the emergence phenomena out of the complex chaotic system in nature, Polkinghorne argues that the pattern forming causality in relation to the form of that emergent being or system has not been examined, whereas the energy as its matter has been examined. To explicate the emergence of the order and its particular pattern of chaos system, Polkinghorne retrieves the Aristotelian Thomistic formal cause and applies it to the contemporary scientific context. So with regard to the same question, Bob Russell here, he suggests the quantum level as a room for divine action in nature without intervention. Due to the interconnectivity between the microscopic and macroscopic realms, he claims that God's direct action in quantum level is able to bring about God's indirect action and thus God's purpose at the microscopic realm. So Russell supports his argument with the both Einstein and Fermi-Dirac statistics that respectively describe quantum mechanics, and Maxwell-Boltzmann statistics, which describes classical mechanics. So even though the mathematical equations of the BE and FD statistics are radically different from one another in the quantum realm of low energies and temperature, but as the external condition reaches the normal macroscopic realm, for instance, room temperature, both equations approach the Boltzmannian equation that characterizes classical statistics. So Russell points out that the statistics disclose epistemologically that the classical chance is grounded mathematically in and arises smoothly in the appropriate limit from quantum statistics. So the point is that if one highlights the movement from the FD and BE statistics to the Boltzmannian statistics, one can argue that deterministic macroscopic world is produced out of the indeterministic microscopic world. In doing so, Russell bases his argument on the idea that QM iota is able to bring about God's purpose in the macroscopic realm. As a result, one can say that general providence, that is the stability of the world, laws of nature, springs up out of divine action in quantum level. On the other hand, QM iota also postulates that God can bring about a direct outcome in the macroscopic realm via quantum events. He gives the example of genetic mutation, which is deeply involved with the hydrogen bond between nucleotides, that is the building blocks of the double strands of DNA molecules. Since QM iota can be directly involved with the break of the hydrogen bond and its synthesis, thus one can say that QM iota can bring about the genetic mutation, and thus God's direct involvement in relation to the evolution process is possible. So God, for Russell, God employs the inherent randomness in nature to bring about God's purpose in the world. In that sense, Russell bases his argument on the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. But when I was writing the third exam and trying to apply those two different theories to the origin of life issue, but first one, Polkinghorne's theory was quite encountering the difficulty in terms of chaos system, in the sense that it describes and it is based on the deterministic physics. So from his perspective, he is arguing his own divine action based on from the perspective of the incompatibilism, which says that there has to be a inherent indeterminacy in nature for God to act in and through nature. But since chaos system does not have the ontological randomness in nature, so basically if he does not solve this difficulty of chaos system, then his argument might not be really convincing. So another issue that I was having with Russell's argument is that if I have some more minutes, we can talk it during the Q&A time. But the origin of life might not be the outcome of God's special divine action. It is very related to his concept of divine action and special divine action. If you have some question, please ask him when we are having Q&A time. But anyway, I wanted to put this divine action under relation to the origin of life under the category of God's special divine action. That is why I try to make my own semantic divine action based on the argument of Korean Germany philosopher named Byung-Chul Han. Han finds the ultimate meaning of power in self-realization. So the will to power is the will to expand the ego, and thus the telos of power is to find the ego in the other. The expansion of the ego, however, does not necessarily postulate naked power, which violently and physically suppresses or controls the other. Because the expansion of the ego in the other is achieved by spontaneous and internal obedience of the other. In that regard, Han criticizes Nietzsche, who highlights external and behavioral assent regardless of internal assent or dissent. Han argues that this overemphasis of Nietzsche on the external consent of the other to the self is rooted in his focus on the expansion of the ego. In doing so, Han argues Nietzsche disregards the genuine implication of power and degrades the other into passive matter that merely bears the will of the ego. In addition, Han also refutes Jacob Burckhardt's argument that power itself is an evil. He claims that Burckhardt's negative understanding of power originates from the de-theologicalization or secularization of the concept of power. Han argues that secularization deprives the divine nature of power in the act of creation. Although it does not point out the human distorted desire, it does point out the human distorted desire, which reduces the other into the possession of the ego and its instrument. Then what is the right way of executing power to achieve the expansion of the ego in the other? Han answers it is achieved by the mediated power. By the mediated power, Han means the endowment of meaning, that is naming activity. So basically, if we are looking at this screen, there are two things, but two things are not meaningful at all if you do not know Korean language system. But when they are put into the Korean language system as a certain form, then the two things become relational and become meaningful, and actually signifies I, myself, and me. So another example would be a nail and a hammer being together in a place do not postulate any relationship or meaning, but when they are situated under a telos, for instance, hammering a nail to hang a family picture, they become mutually related and become meaningful. In that sense, meaning is relational and it renders a relationship. Han claims that power fulfills stability when it is exercised in light of being meaningful. So going back to the issue of the origin of life again, I'm saying that along with the divine action in and through the natural process, which produces physical effects in the world, which is I have in mind the QM iota, and it might be analogously closer to the creation through matter in Genesis chapter 2. But along with QM iota, creation in and through nature, and which brings about physical effects, God simultaneously creates by naming each creature and its causation, closer to the creation by words in Genesis chapter 1 of the priestlyhood source. So this naming activity is to endow the divine telos and meaning unto the emergent living beings. The mediated divine action in and through nature discloses the divine affirmation of creaturely autonomy. Thus, the mediated divine action is inseparable from God's action of the endowment of eschatological meaning, which proclaims that each creaturely being is an autonomous being and that they, as genuine others, are destined to have a mutual fellowship with God. Naming activity, therefore, is God's act of endowing the emerged living beings with the divine telos, that is, the mutual fellowship between God and living creaturely being at the eschaton. Just as Han argues that the endowment of telos makes things meaningful, this endowment of divine telos makes each living creature and the origin of life meaningful. Thank you for your attention.
We'll have an open discussion later, but maybe one or two quick questions for DK right now. You'd like
So just one question. It sounds as though what you're implying is that life originated as a meaningless result of random events following perhaps the abiogenesis perspective, but God's imbuement of it with relationality imparted meaning to it. Or are you trying to say that God acted in such a way to bring about life and concurrently or successively imbued it with meaning after its creation?
Yeah, later, the second option that you were talking is pretty much closer to what I'm intending to argue, because QM Iota, it is in a way, even though it can bring about direct outcome into the world and God's purpose, but it is at the same time mediated divine action. So what I'm saying is, whatever happened from the organic soup or from the transfer medium of comments, God was already working on through the way of quantum mechanics. And that quantum mechanical divine action is actually bearing semantic divine action. So you might heard about the difference between canonic proponents such as Polkinghorne and the Moltmannian scholars, and the other side, Pannenberg's and these two scholars here. So even though the other side, like Polkinghorne, while he was supporting his divine action, he also abhors the empty spot of God's action in the world. But what I was trying to say is, it is not empty. It is not the self-withdrawal of divine action. It is actually semantic divine action that was filling with this emptiness in relation to divine action. Does that make sense?
Yes.